Are we ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me know when we're recording.
We are live, Chair Randall.
That was fast.
Faster than normal.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the October 13th, 2022 Northern Virginia Transportation Authority business meeting. This meeting will be conducted in person via live stream via YouTube. Would somebody please do the roll call for me? Mr. Board Secretary Mr. David to do the roll call for me, please, sir.
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Snyder.
Here.
Chairman McKay.
Here.
Chair Wheeler.
Here.
Board Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mayor Wilson. Here. Mayor Davis Younger. She is
Present.
Mayor Rischel.
Here.
Mayor Meyer. He's not here. Senator Boysko. Senator Harity, Supervisor Harity. Here. Mr. Bedell.
Here.
Ms. Hines.
Here.
Mr. Cole. Mayor Wood. Mr. Lynch.
Here.
And Mrs. DeGrove.
Here.
Chair Randall, we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The first thing we're going to do is, before our action items, we have a presentation on the Transform 66 outside the Beltway concession fee project. Ms. Shaw, for you, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank
Chair
you.
Randall. Yeah, I'm going to start with the concession fee projects, just walk through the status of those and then a very brief update on 66 outside.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
These are the requirements. I include them in every presentation on these in case you're thinking of any new projects along the way, but just the requirements and, listed there. So benefit the toll facility, be federally eligible, and meet one or more of the project or meet the project improvement goals, which is moving more people, enhancing transportation connectivity, improve transit service, reduce roadway congestion, and increase travel options. And then, of course, they have to be selected by this body and then approved by the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Based on your selections so far, a number of projects are underway, and so I'll let you know on the status of those on the next slide. Thank you. So 4 of the projects are integral to the 66 project. Poplar Tree Road Bridge has been open for some time, since November of 2020. We're also working to expand the Route 29 interchange and bridges there. That construction is underway, completing really, but traffic has been on the new bridges again for some time. Widening Germantown Road Bridge so that it can accommodate 4 lanes. Traffic is already shifted to the new bridge. And then Monument Drive, we're adding a pedestrian facility, and that construction is also underway. In terms of transit improvements, there are a number of these being done by various agencies. I'm still on the other slide, I'm sorry. And so the commuter parking garage and transit station at Fairfax Corner, Fairfax County Department of Transportation is leading that effort. That is well underway. If you've been by there, you've been seeing that rise up out of the ground there. And that's going to be complete at the end of 2023. The East Falls Church Metro Rail Station bus bay expansion, that also is design is underway with the construction start planned in early 2023. The Western Bus Maintenance and Storage Facility that PRTC owns and operates, that's been complete and open last year in 2021, began operations out of there. And then VRE has a number of projects that are underway, 5 distinct project components. And actually these are now, I need to update, but 4 out of these 5 projects are now being managed by the Virginia Rail and Public Passenger Rail Authority. Thank you. So VRPA has 4 of those, and then VRE has the other one. And then a number of pedestrian improvements.
Before you move on, so that amount that we have, is that for all the transit improvements or that's for the VRE?
That was just on the other sources of funds that VRE, so I had that listed. Their estimate now stands at $219 million. And they're getting 105 million out of the concession fee funds, but they're showing that the balance of that is fully funded through other sources.
Okay.
So there's no, I'm just showing that
Okay,
as
all right.
an aside.
Thank you very much.
Right. And you'll see that there's also a spreadsheet that has a lot more detailed information. So you will see that reflected in the spreadsheet, which I'm not going to walk through, but there's a lot of detail in that that shows what's the full estimate, what other funding sources might be used for the specific project, and then whether there's an anticipated shortfall or overage on each project.
Thank you so much.
So pedestrian improvement projects, there's a number of those. The town of Vienna is doing a Nutley Street mixed-use trail. That is final design is underway. City of Alexandria or City of Falls Church, City of Fairfax is doing the George Snyder Trail from Route 123 to Route 50 at Draper Drive. That one construction is scheduled to begin in 2023. And then there's a Lee Highway sidewalk improvement that VDOT is actually doing from Nutley to Baden Drive. And that construction award is anticipated here before the end of the year. And then in terms of roadway projects, a number of those underway as well by Prince William County, Route 234 at Falls Ford Road Interchange Project. That also is really getting close to completion, scheduled to open to traffic later this year, and then construction completing up in 2023. A new project that was added that gets another piece of widening there, Devlin Road widening from Falls Ford to University Boulevard. That's about 60% design complete, with construction anticipated to be complete in 2025. And then Falls Ford Road widening, which is under construction. That's from Groveton to 234 Business, with a planned completion later next year. There's an intersection improvement project that VDOT is managing, and that construction contract was awarded in August 2022. And then widening Route 29 for about 1.5 miles. That is a design build project, and we just issued notice to proceed here this summer with the 2026 completion. That's also a VDOT managed project. And the next 2 slides are just the projects listed with the concession fee amounts that have been approved through September of this year. And then with the column to the far right shows a potential shortfall or surplus. And that's based on the data that's in our VDOT system. So it may not be reflective if there are other funding sources that might not yet be reflected in our system. So the only 3 projects right now that we see any shortfall and or surplus, the commuter parking garage, because the estimate is a little bit lower than what the current funded amount, but that project is under construction as we speak. And then on the second page, you'll see there's a couple of projects there that have a potential shortfall. One is the East Falls Church Metro Bus Bay expansion, as well as the BRE Manassas parking garage and bridge. And again, those are based on just the estimates we have. I don't know that they would come to the authority for those overages, or if they're working to identify other funding sources. But all told, if you look at just from looking at the current picture, there are 8.8 million currently of monies that are available and not obligated that are available that are within that $500 million.
And of the 8.8 million, I think 8 million is in Prince County.
Well, I don't know where. Well, yes, that would be for you all to study too. Yes. All right, so that's kind of the financial picture of where things stand on the concession fee project. So I would, if there are any questions on that before I move to kind of.
Are there any questions? Yes, ma'am.
It's really not a question, it's an observation. I'm becoming concerned about projects where we're really missing on the estimates. So if I look at the Arlington project, not to pick on Arlington, that's almost a 50% increase. And so I think and there were several things that came through last meeting where the increases were in the 30% range. And so I really think we, as the authority, we need to ask more questions about what's going on to cause those increases in an orderly manner. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, and so I didn't raise it last year, last month, it was at the end of the meeting. But we're spending a lot more time at CTB trying to understand where we're missing and why we're missing. And I think we need to do that same rigor here on the projects that we're funding, whether it's with our MBTA dollars or with the concession money, just so that we have a better sense. Part of what we're learning is estimating wasn't good in the early years at CTB, but we're getting a lot better. The estimating manual's been changed. Anyway, I've been thinking about this, and I think.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think it's a valid statement. Let me ask, is it an estimation difference, or is it that people are coming back and asking for a contract adjustment because the cost of materials and the cost of labor and all those things have increased so significantly?
I mean, I would say on these projects, it's probably been a combination of many.
Okay.
So some of that involved right of way, we've seen that significantly increase. And I also think you have to go back and look at like, when did the estimate get created? So I know like on the Falls Church Metro, the bus bay expansion, they were waiting for some other projects to get completed so that they could even do their project. And so, to be able to, you had to sit and wait. And so that estimate may have had some age on it, but I think you really need to dig down and look at
All of
each.
those are legitimate. I mean, they're really legitimate. It's just that we should understand it,
I think, sure. I think for the purposes of the record, right, I think to the extent this is raised for your eyebrows is because it mirrors almost exactly what we're seeing in our jurisdiction
Yes,
in
that's
every
right.
capital project. I think the broader point is well taken. I just, given the context in which we're having this conversation, it seems like it's worthwhile to just raise that, right? We're all
I was
hanging on by
thinking
our fingernails.
That's
as our
why
projects-
I asked that, because we're seeing, coming back for contract adjustments at these numbers, everywhere. So, but I think it's valid. Okay.
All right, and so just to have a few photos of our progress out on the corridor. So this is the Route 28 interchange at I-66. You're looking to the north. And so you can see, that interchange begin to take shape, actually taking shape. The one bridge in the middle there, where you see there's a flyover ramp that's heading from westbound 66 to northbound 28. That deck is getting ready to get poured, but that was where we had our beam signing for those of you that might have been able to participate in that. But that's big change at that interchange. The next photo is of our Route 29 interchange. This is a concession project where, we pushed out the bridges to make that space in the middle between the two bridges that you see there, to allow for future expansion of metro or transit in that area. That's also a September picture. It's probably hard to see from here, but express lanes are running on the bridge there on both bridges in September. This is a picture looking west into Prince William County. And I really like this picture because it shows the 66 on the right, and then that meandering road is Falls Ford Road, which is being widened as we speak. You can see the new interchange up to the kind of top left of your photo there, taking shape, and that's the interchange that's getting ready to open here before the end of the year. And those were, you see the mix of that. The 66 project allowed that concession fee project to serve that east-west movement in the 66 corridor. And then if you didn't know, we did open the western segment early on September 10th. It did open initially for free, but on September 24th, we moved that to a tolling operation. And we're using HOV2 rules from when we started in September, and that will continue until we open the full facility. And then on the next page, just to re-emphasize, but the I-66 corridor wide will be moving to HOV3 requirement when we open the remaining segments of the 66 outside the Beltway project, and we are on track to open that in December this year. And so just look for more information on that as we get closer to opening. But just a reminder, and that border-wide change includes all the way into DC. So it's 66 inside the Beltway as well as outside the Beltway. We'll be moving to the HOV3. So with that.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Sir.
I just have to state for the record that the change from HOV2 to HOV3 inside the Beltway is not going to be a popular change. And I hope that it can be reviewed to see if it's absolutely essential before it's put in place. And I'd like a formal review and indications. Can it be changed or why? Why can't it be changed? Thank you.
When you're categorizing things, do you consider pedestrian as transit?
I mean, I just call it transportation, but I don't know officially what the designation would be. I mean, we include it as part of our, you know, when we look at the needs of transportation in the corridor, it's one of those things that we consider.
Okay.
I
don't know if does not have any pedestrian mega projects.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the other thing, this is more philosophical, but I hate that we do this line, like, well, that's transit and that's not transit, because you look at the 66 corridor, you know, all those bridges are longer than what they need to be for cars. We made them longer so that Metro Rail can go in. And you talk about what investment that was, but it's not counted. It's not transit. But, you know, the fact that there's all this planning going on, you know, it's a system. I feel like we shouldn't be pitting ourselves, you know, against each other. We need it all to work together. And I think the 66 corridor is a good example of that.
I understand. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a comment on that, you've got the trail from 66. too.
Yes,
So.
yeah.
Yeah. That piece of it.
Yes,
Because
and that's right.
Everything's wider for that
Right.
as well.
And we didn't call, it's just part of the project.
Anything else? Thank you. All right, we're going to go back up to the first action item. That was only a presentation to the first action item is to approve the minutes from the September 8th meeting. I'm assuming everyone has reviewed the minutes.
Chair, I move approval.
Second.
Motion made by Chairman McKay and seconded by Mr. Wilson. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion will pass unanimously for the in the room. All right, our next item, action item is now number 5. Which is the approval of policy 29, activation, monitoring, and the appropriation changes. Mayor Rischel, the Finance Committee, would you like to speak on this before Mr. Lungi does?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In FY22, the authority authorized a special test audit to assess the externally imposed risk of duplicate reimbursements that were being submitted by project sponsors and paid by the NBTA. The reason for the special audit was the reporting of duplicate reimbursements, which had been either self-identified by project sponsors or by NBTA staff. The test audit did identify previously undiscovered duplicate reimbursements. This is why the authority approved an ongoing audit program with audit costs being recovered through the discovery of duplicate payments. The Finance Committee reviewed this policy change at our September meeting and voted to recommend approval by the full authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? I think it feels like we've been discussing this for a while now, but maybe not. But any questions from the authority members? Because I'm on finance, so.
I would ask if Mr. Long, you had anything to
Mr. Lungi,
No, I think that was a great review.
I thought so too. Any other questions? Ms. Rich, would you like to make a motion?
The motion is, I move the authority approval of the proposed changes to policy 29, project activation, monitoring, and deappropriation identified in the attached draft.
Motion's been made. So a second on the motion. I'm happy to second that. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item number 6, Mr. Wilson, I will come to you just a second. Is the appointment? Yes.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The
Just a
couple of years ago, we appointed Joanne Anderson, our city attorney, to the Council of Councils. And she did such a good job that we're replacing her with Christina Zachman Brown, also from our city attorney's office. She's right here in the front row. Wave. We are single-handedly working our way through the Alexandria City Attorney's Office. We're like a law firm for you guys by hour. So I would move approval of the appointment of Christina Zachman Brown, Deputy City Attorney for the City of Alexandria, to replace Joanna C. Anderson, Alexandria City Attorney on the MBTA Council of Councils.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Wilson.
Christina's great. She's been with the city for 15 years. She's a wonderful attorney. I think she did a great job advising.
Okay.
She might even be able to keep Jeff out of trouble.
Oh.
I should have seconded
Wonderful, wonderful. Anybody else? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion will pass unanimously. Thank you and congratulations. You're great. But definitely welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right, item number 7 is the call for projects. Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So it is that time of the year
Yes.
again that we are requesting that you approve the call for projects for fiscal year 2029 CMAQ and RSTP funds. As a reminder, CMAQ program funds are for transportation projects that contribute to the attainment or maintenance of our national ambient air quality standards. And RSTP funds provide flexible funding that may be used for projects to improve and preserve conditions and performance on federal highways, bridges, tunnels, bike ped facilities, and transit capital projects. In coordination with the RJAC, we do have a recommended list of projects that we do towards the middle part of the year or early part of the year. The amount that's usually available, and I say usually because we are programming or making programming recommendations for the out years, it's usually around $80 million. Also, I'd like to note that VDOT provides the match for both CMAQ and RSTP funds. So on page 2 of the project of the staff report, some deadlines are noted that the application submittal, if you approve tonight, would be January 13th. The team worksheet that is required for CMAQ applications is due January 27th. And then the resolution of support that we require for the applications are due January the 27th. Our next step after the submission of the applications would be to do a staff analysis and come to the authority in March to ask your recommendation on the recommended project list. I say recommendations because you, as the authority, you make recommendations. The Commonwealth Transportation Board is the decision-making body for these funds.
So before I make a motion, I'm just going to, just for the record, and because we have a new authority member, and we should have done that first. I'm sorry, I'm moving that second. I will say that the CMAQ is an acronym for congestion mitigation and air quality. RSTP is Regional Surface Transportation Program, and the RJAC is Regional Jurisdiction Agency Coordinating Committee. It took me about 18 months to go to that in my head. Thus, I am going to share them with everybody else. Are there any questions from Ms. Backman? Seeing none, I am, and this is just for the call for projects.
This is just for the call for
I
projects.
make a motion, I move the authority to approve the call for projects for the FY 2029 CMAQ and RSTP funds.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded by the vice chair. Mr. Snyder, discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion will pass unanimously as well. Before we go to the the discussion items, information items. Should have done this earlier, and I apologize. We do have a new member of the authority. I think many people have mentioned, but maybe not everybody, depending on what ribbons cuttings we attend or don't attend together. Would you like to introduce yourself, tell anything about yourself? What are your fears, favorite colors, all that kind of stuff, whatever you want to say?
Fears, favorite colors. I had 2 out of the 3 acronyms, so I've been around transportation for a long time, but no, I'm basically born and raised, Northern Virginia resident for a while. Always, my dad's got the parkway named after him, Fairfax County Parkway for most of it, so I've got a deep history in transportation and in the county and in the region. Always swore I'd never run for office. Took the plunge in 2007, been a supervisor on the Fairfax County Board since 2007. Again, very, very active in transportation there and elsewhere. Also am a chief financial officer for government contractors. So I've got 2 full-time, part-time jobs, so I like to say. Did enjoy working with your CFO, Michael Wong, when he was our auditor to the board, but look forward to contributing any way I can. I've got a lot of ideas, look forward to sharing them. Favorite color is green. I don't know if I have any fears right now.
You said everything but your name.
That was right here. Supervisor Pat Hardy.
Nice.
Springfield District Supervisor, Fairfax County Board of Supervisors.
Wonderful.
And you now have 2 members of the West Springfield High School Mafia.
There you go. Forgot that part.
Oh, the mafia part. Well, that's interesting to know.
Maybe you should talk about your fear.
I know.
I went to leave.
Were you in the mafia as well?
No, we were on the other side.
We were
Yeah. I mean,
At one point in time, there were 5 elected officials in Fairfax County from West Springfield High School. That's pretty crazy. Clerk John Fry still there, Sheriff Stan Berry, Delegate Dave Alvo, myself, and Commonwealth Attorney Ray Morrell.
The question is, how many high schools did Fairfax have at the time?
Oh,
not as many as now.
probably no, but quite a few. So
Really?
we probably had 10 back then.
I'll be proud of that high school then. All right, discussion items, information items, transaction update, where we will have a discussion about the public comments to the transaction update. Ms. Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are concluding a year where we adopted a 6-year program and undertook the update of your long-range transportation plan. So as you all may recall, the public comment period for transactions started on August 1 and it ended on September the 18th. We actually had the public hearing last month for the transaction update. Without me getting into too much detail, I will turn it over to Sri because we did have several comments submitted on the draft plan. And Keith is also on the line. We didn't want him to come in tonight, feeling a little under the weather, but he's also on the line to present some of the slides as well.
Thank you, Ms. Beckman. Jonathan, if you can put up the presentation. So, next slide, please. I'll just walk you quickly through the process where we are about transaction update now and some of the highlights of the public comments we heard. And based on that and our own internal reviews, identified certain potential enhancements to the plan and project space. Walk you through that. Next step. I'll not go through all of that. As Monica said, we have been doing this for more than a year now, and we are coming potentially the last stretch of this process with an anticipated adoption by you all in December. Next slide. Monica mentioned the public comment period and the public hearing we had. We had the draft plan summary and the project list out on our website for public to review. We had an interactive sortable project list too, so people could slice and dice in different ways and see. There was an interactive map and other supporting information. There was an online comment form through which people could submit comments in a structured manner, so we could look at them and analyze them in a consistent way. But the main document, the plan document, and that comment form were available in 3 different languages. We publicize this through various ways, newsletters, social media, Ambassador Kits, which many of you and your jurisdictional communication team have used. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, we jumped one.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we received a total of 233 comments. Most of them came through the comment form, but other formats were also used by public to send us the comments. Obviously, as you can see, one comment came in Korean, but all the other comments were in English. Though we provided that opportunity to comment in different languages. Next one, please. The map shows the geographical distribution of where the comments came from. As you can see, the darker the shade of the zip code, that the more comments we receive from that zip code. So you can see that as you get closer to the center of the region or the inside the Beltway region, you get more comments from those areas. The 2 zip codes you can see in dark purple, one on the bottom and one inside the Beltway. The one on the bottom is in Prince William County near the Van Buren Road project. You heard about that project during the 6-year program where there was some opposition to that project. That same theme came into the transaction public comments too. The one in the inside the Beltway, that is Falls Church zip code, where we received a variety of comments, including a lot of support about the transit and bike pedestrian project in and around the city. There were probably less than 10 comments that came from outside the Northern Virginia. Next slide. Here are the common themes. When we reviewed all the comments, some of the themes that emerged out of those comments, there were a large number of opposition to any new roadways or widening the existing roads. That was a common theme with that. And then that same concept spilled over to the environmental and safety concerns. If you are building more roads, it might affect the emissions and safety issues. But we also had a lot of support about the transit projects, especially the BRT network that we have proposed in the plan and all the bike pedestrian projects that we have. Next, please. Again, we try to understand these comments in different ways. You can see that most of the comments came was about roadways, but if you look at transit and bike, but that also has equal amount of comments coming in. As I explained earlier, most of those projects about roadways, the comments about roadways were negative. Next one. We specifically ask questions to understand whether the public think that the transaction plan meets or at least achieve the parts of those goals. The 3 goals we have: mobility, accessibility, and resiliency. Comments were mixed. Some people disagreed or strongly disagreed, while others agreed or strongly agreed. The people, again, the same themes, I will not repeat it in the next slide. Also, you will see the similar responses about the core values. The main area where people disagree or strongly disagree is based on the understanding about road projects, how road projects may or may not perform. Next slide. I just mentioned about the core values, so that was that slide with the chart. Coming on to the scenario analysis, this is another set of comments that we heard. We tried to present different plausible future scenarios and how our plan will fit in among if any of those scenarios play out. And I want to bring your attention to the last column, if you can read it from here. That column says the comments that we heard about the scenarios were neither positive nor negative. Majority of the comments were in that area. I want to bring this attention because that tells us that people were either not clear what these scenarios are or what does it mean in terms of the plan. That's the kind of comments we received when we reviewed them. We'll come back to that in a minute. Next slide. So we asked, we gave the opportunity to comment on specific projects too. As you can see, there are 429 projects in the draft project list. So obviously, a lot of projects received one or more comments. We're showing only the top ones. And as you can see, I already mentioned about the Van Buren Road project and small projects like that. So that project received most comments and they were mostly negative. But if you go down that list, you will see, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of support for transit and bike ped projects down there in that list. Next slide, please. I'll stop at that point, and if you have any questions on any of those, I will take that first before we move to the next.
Wow, thank you very much. We have questions. I know, no questions, okay. No, actually, I have no question, I have a comment, understandably, most people, when people are happy and satisfied, they don't normally call their elected officials or whomever and say, I'm so happy, this is just wonderful. I mean, that just doesn't happen very often. Normally you hear from people when they're not satisfied, which is human nature and normal. I did notice in this, though, there were a lot of projects where every comment was a positive comment. And I don't think I've ever seen anything that showed that before. And so if you're out there and listening to us on this meeting, I appreciate all the comments, but I did find it was interesting. And you are correct that for the most part, if there is positive comments, I mean, of course, a lot of the transit comments of the safe route to school in Falls Church was nothing but positive comments. And there are a few of these where they were all positive comments, and so that is unusual and appreciated. But also where the comments are where people have concerns, getting those are appreciated as well. So, yeah.
Madam Chair, is there, I wasn't sure if we were headed there next.
Yes, there are a few more slides.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
There are a few more slides.
Yes.
I just say, just one quick question. I think what Ms. Randall said is right. We're more likely to hear negative comments than positive. We're used to that. But I'm wondering, compared to the last time we did this, the total volume of independent people who participate, are we doing better? And I feel like we're doing better in soliciting comments and trying to get people to pay attention and comment, but is there a way to quantify that compared to where we were the last time we did this?
Yes, we can. We actually looked at that, and we actually, we did more effort to go out, especially in multiple locations where we may not get comments usually, and through multiple means to reach out to the people. So we did a lot more effort this time, but unfortunately the response we got was probably about 1/3 of what we received 5 years back.
Yeah, I felt like the numbers were kind of low, and maybe that's a sign of neutrality, not necessarily a bad thing, especially if we expanded our outreach. And clearly there's some concentrated, well-organized groups that are focused on one or two elements of the plan, and I get that that can skew the numbers, but I think it's helpful for us to know that even though we're doing much better in the way in outreach, doesn't automatically translate necessarily to more comments, and so we have to kind of draw our own conclusions about what that means.
When we discussed this with your staff from the jurisdictions and agencies, some of them pointed out, this year, Noel also pointed out that there were several other transportation programs or plans, projects where going on with public comments around the same time. For example, TPB's Visualize 2045 was a major one in that region. So that might have meant that people were already looking at it and saying, another plan, I already commented on plan. So maybe there was some fatigue on that.
Yeah, fair.
On project number 406, the WOD regional trail capacity, were the negative comments centered around tree removal?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So we looked at these comments, what they were telling us, and we also, as staff and our consultant team, we reviewed several of these project lists and the documents to see where we can make some improvements or enhance the documents so that we can understand it better. So I will go through a few of them. First, the easy ones. I will give the more complex one to Keith. So the project list is easy one. We identified several duplications. So a project is mentioned either submitted by, say, one county and then the VDOT, or neighboring jurisdictions provided the same description or similar description. So we want to make sure that we avoid duplication. So essentially, same projects, we don't want them to be repeating in the document. So we identified some of them. So we will drop one and keep the other one, or make sure we capture the entire description and keep that as one project. Next one. So similarly, we identified that certain projects we had noted the wrong project sponsors. For example, if Fairfax County submitted a project for conservation, at some point we noted it as a different county or top down or things like that. So we want to make sure those are all corrected. Project location, similar to that. Some projects were identified in the wrong place, so we want to make sure we correct that. The last two projects there, the third major bullet, remove project under construction or in field. This, I will come back to this theme again later, where we talk about build versus no build. In 2045, that's our horizon year we are looking at. And when we do our model-based analysis, we say what are the projects that are already in place now, plus any projects that are under construction or fully funded. That set of projects is what we consider as no build. No build doesn't mean there is no building happening. There is some building, and this has been a little bit confusion among certain people. So we compare that with what if we build all the projects that we are considering in the plan. In this case, 429 projects. So that's a comparison we do. While we were finalizing that project, 439 projects, and started all the evaluations, these two projects were not yet under contract or haven't been finalized that they're ready to go. But during the evaluations that we were doing and beyond that, these projects are now, especially the southern one, we know the American Legion Bridge the southern side of the hotline, that is from Dallas Toll Road to the Parkway or to the bridge. That project is now under construction. So that contract was awarded after, while we were doing all this analysis. So we couldn't take it out at that point. So these two projects probably we need to take it out from the project because they are under construction or are ready to move ahead. It will be built before 2045, that's the assumption. We checked with our consultants. We had done some of the model-based analysis for these type of changes, and based on that, we don't think we need to do any additional model runs, or it's not going to make any major changes. There might be some differences in the performance, but not major changes that we need to redo the model runs or anything like that. Next one. Map was not, it is still not part of the plan. Plan includes the plan summary document as well as the project list, but we had an interactive map out there for public to look at and comment. So for them to understand the projects better, we identified some improvements we can make. The projects were not drawn correctly or not to a selection, so we can make some changes there too. These are some of the changes that will actually make in the project list itself and the map. Next one, please. This is where I will hand it over to Keith.
Thank you, Shri. Chair Randall, members of the authority, I hope you can hear me okay.
Fine.
Yeah, good, thank you. I hope to avoid a coughing fit, but apologies if I do have one. Scenarios, just by way of explanation, scenario analysis is the name that we give to the technique that we use within transaction to explore uncertainty associated with long-range transportation planning. Keeping in mind, we're looking out to 2045 with this plan, and with the best will in the world and the best tools in the world, there's no doubt we'll be wrong in the forecasts. The question really is how wrong. And so scenario analysis is a technique we use to try and get a grip on uncertainty. As a result, and as Shri alluded to earlier, it's one of the more complex parts of transaction and by far the most complicated one to communicate. To the extent that we disproportionately have a number of pages in the draft plan document on scenario analysis relative to a discussion of the actual main results. So, one of the things we're grappling with as we work towards a final draft is better explaining what scenario analysis is or is not, and to help kind of people to understand a little bit better, or for us indeed to better communicate the findings and perhaps focus a little less on the mechanics, but more on the conclusions. Scenarios are really not intended to package groups of projects differently. We don't really do that. We just look at external factors for the most part that might actually come to pass that would change the analysis that we do. So we think there's certainly some room for enhancement with explaining the scenario assumptions and also explaining what we learned from the scenario analysis itself, which is essentially that for the most part the plan is solid, whatever the most likely direction of the future will be. So we're reasonably confident that the scenario analysis has done what we set out to do, but we do need to explain it better. The second major bullet on this page talks about replacing section 7, which is entitled "What happens if the future is different than expected," which is where we deal with a scenario analysis. And as I mentioned, we perhaps give too much prominence to this part, and we should perhaps make this a subsection under the earlier discussion on the impacts of the plan, which I think is a bit more proportional in the messaging that we're trying to communicate, which is to focus on the plan performance and to mention how uncertainty could affect plan performance. As part of all of that, again, Shri alluded to this earlier, there's probably some more work we can do with explaining definitions, some phrasing, which perhaps is just a little bit too inside baseball for the audience that we're targeting this document at. So that's something else we're taking a look at as not just as part of scenarios, but more broadly. But it really surfaces for scenarios because there's a lot of assumptions that go with the scenario analysis work. Next slide, please. Continuing on the theme of scenarios, one of the things that there's no argument about is that there is a strong linkage between transportation, land use, housing, etc. And as many of you have heard me say before, land use is not the prerogative of MBTA. That's a local matter which is dealt with through appropriate channels. And nonetheless, we have received some comments, to the effect that transaction, doesn't address land use, and therefore that kind of undermines the value of land use planning. In many senses, it does address the land use planning assumptions that go into developing COG's cooperative forecasts, which is the basis of the modeling forecast that we do for 2045. So we do take it into account. What we don't take into account is changing land use, because as I say, that's not the prerogative of MBTA. I think nonetheless there is a desire from some commenters that transactions should go further. I think our response is more likely to be that we need to communicate that that we don't address land use and why we do not address land use, but how land use is nonetheless incorporated into transaction. When we, for the current transaction, which was adopted 5 years ago, we did do some scenario analysis on land use. We chose not to repeat that this time, primarily on the basis that we didn't think we'd find the results would be very much different from what they were 5 years ago. So we are contemplating mentioning that in the plan in a little bit more detail, just to kind of revisit the work that was done 5 years ago, but we haven't made a final decision on that yet. Next slide.
Can we just stay on that slide for just a second, Keith? It's an interesting discussion. So, you know, with respect to anyone who believes that land use should be considered in these scenarios, I mean, listen, almost every voting member of MBTA is an elected official from a locality, and all of us take into account land use as we're making all these decisions. And so I don't know how, because I don't want to sound disrespectful when I say that. I'm sure people understand that. But I think that's a message that could be presented, that a group of local elected officials always understand that land use and gentrification go hand in hand. And a lot of the, you know, the very polite and very collegial, but some of the more intense discussions that we have even in this body is around, you know, how our transportation, our transit should look as related to land use. So I'm a little surprised that would be a concern of people, because obviously we're always concerned about housing and land use as we make these decisions. And I don't know that MBTA needs to do any more of an explanation or diving into any other explanation, because that's not our charge, except to say everybody who's sitting here understands what land use is and housing is as relates to transportation.
Madam Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I actually really like the idea of including this, because I think it's not just a value neutral statement that land use and transportation are related. This is saying that, I mean, this is a document. It's not about land use. It's about the goals of transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an important piece, concentrating land use, really proximate to major transit projects. It improves the outcomes in this plan.
Yeah, no, I like the statement. I just don't want, you know, the MBTA staff to feel like they need to do a whole lot of explaining to.
They don't want to do like a general land use plan for Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
Anybody here?
Negative. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, let us know when you guys are done with that.
That's one way to get more comments.
That's right.
So
Plenty of
throw that out there. Thank you.
Row.
Thank you. You can go on now.
Next slide.
Thank you.
How do you-
So moving on to slide 19, there are a number of comments that express the view that transaction is unaffordable and does not recommend or prioritize anything. You know, while these are valid comments, you know, it's intentional that transaction does include projects that go well beyond the funding capacity of the region, and you know, it is also intentional that, you know, recommendations and prioritization does not feature within transaction, because that is the purpose of the 6-year program, which is based on the projects that are included in transaction, but a separate process. So, you know, our response to that, and this came up 5 years ago, and again, we'll need to revisit to see if we can make this either clearer or stronger. That you know, transaction is really providing you know, you the authority members with options in terms of making future funding requests, but is not intended to tell you what to submit for funding. That really has to take into account a broad range of other factors. And as I say, there's a separate 6-year program evaluation process, which does build upon some of the analysis in transaction, but that is not the purpose of transaction. So we want to kind of explain some of these concepts a little bit more clearly. That there's also perhaps a little bit of confusion or misunderstanding between goals within transaction, which went through a process you probably will recall late last year, where we came to you with a whole series of performance measures and weights associated with 10 performance measures, and that is what the evaluation in transaction is based upon. But nonetheless, that we've been asked, including through our own committees, about how that ties in with COG's climate goals, and also I think as Shri mentioned earlier that why is there such a roadway focus in transaction, which I don't know that we, from staff perspective, necessarily concur with, but I think that these are some of the kind of comments that don't necessarily need a change in transaction, but they perhaps do need enhanced communication, clarification statements to kind of address some of these things. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the final kind of slide here for potential enhancements that we're looking at, these kind of, as the title suggests, other. We've recently noticed that the federal government is using the term carbon pollution rather than emissions and greenhouse gas for its own purposes. So we just want to think through whether we should be consistent with that or whether we should stay the course with the terminology that we've already got. I want to stress again that transaction is not a funding document. We want to make the document not necessarily look beautiful, but to make it a bit more aesthetically pleasing than it currently is. So our consultant team is already looking at ways that they can enhance some of that, and then just take a final look at whether we think the document as a whole is communicating what transaction is, and is the message that comes out the one that we intend to come out. I'd also add that we have had one round of meetings in September and early October with your technical advisory committee, the planning coordination advisory committee, and the planning and programming committee to get their first reaction following the end of public comment, and with a view to preparing the committees for more discussion on this during October, and subsequently endorsement of a final draft plan in the November meeting cycle. And if that all goes to plan, then 2 months from now at your December meeting, we'll be looking to come back to you for adoption of the final draft of transaction and the associated project list. So I think that was my last slide, other than there's probably a next step slide, but which I don't think there's anything to add that I haven't already said. Yeah. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. You got through it with not one call. Questions?
Just one. A question about the estimated effects of the build versus no build scenario on emissions reduction. To sort of to your to Keith's last point about kind of discussing electrification and emissions. So I know there's a call out box that in the plan that talks about the 3 projects specifically designed to increase access to charging and fueling. So the 54% reduction in emissions reduction, is that attributable to just those projects, or because I'm thinking relative to no build, the build scenario has a pretty significant increase in vehicle miles traveled. So I'm trying to figure out how we could be increasing vehicle miles traveled and reducing emissions by 50%. Is it just those 3 projects, or is there something else?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Tom Harrington, who's our consultant project manager, who's on the call right now, to address the specifics of that. But I thank you for the question, because this is something that came up as a comment and during the committee review process that I referred to just a moment ago. And I think this is one of those areas where better communication is needed. We've been trying to get a balancing act between keeping things simple and but at the same time comprehensive. But those two things are kind of naturally in conflict with one another. So if we want to keep things simple, then the nuances are missed. And if we go really complex, then the document moves from 24 to 28 or 32 pages. It's been a real challenge to get the right balance. But Tom, could you kind of address the specific question?
Yeah, when, in that same chart where we're looking at the benefits of the build network, it does show that based just on the projects using sort of the same electrification rates between the no build and the build, there's actually a slight increase in emissions of 1.7%. And so the call out box was really saying, with electrification hitting targets of where we think we can get based on a number of factors, that was where the 54% would come from. But it wasn't suggesting that there were the handful of electrification EV infrastructure projects were not solely responsible for the 54%. It was just more showing sensitivity analysis of the difference that, with the same electrification.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Was the 54%, the decrease of 54% is widespread EV adoption relative to not widespread EV adoption.
That's correct.
Kind of has nothing to do with build or no build scenario.
Right. It was pointing out the importance of the electrification assumption when you're looking at emissions. That's right.
So if I may, not that I want to edit transaction on the fly here, but I think we're really misrepresenting the build scenario if we're attributing that to a 50% emissions reduction, when what we're actually talking about is electrification of consumer vehicles, which it will or won't happen, I think, generally speaking, irrespective of our scenarios and transactions. So I might suggest, I think it would be a little more honest to just make a notation. I think you're right. I think Tom's right to point out it's worth explicating that assumption. Somewhere transactions should say, if widespread EV adoption happens, we will see a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's a fine thing to include, but to make it seem like that's a result of our build scenario versus no build feels a little disingenuous, a lot disingenuous.
You're absolutely right, but the point here is we already have that explanation in the document. If you look only at the graph, only at that chart, you will not see it. Right behind that, we have called out that blue box there, explain exactly what was at that point.
Sure, but this doesn't say anything about the build versus no build, and including in the graph above makes it seem like the 54% reduction is the result of the build scenario. I'm just saying, I think we should remove it probably.
We also noted where we could improve the writing of the report to explain these things.
Sure, or just remove the emissions reduction in the graph of percent change of build versus no build. Because I think, this is sort of the point, right? We talk about this a lot with our 6-year funding plan. I think, I know Mr. Snyder and I have a particularly strong point of view about reducing VMT should be a goal. And I think if our own document is implying that you can increase VMT and somehow still cut your emissions in half, that's a policy problem, right? That we're indicating as much as well as it not being an accurate statement.
Well, first of all, I think, Mr. Tyler, I'm not the only 2 people in this room concerned about vehicle maltravel.
I know, but we failed to persuade everybody that should be a criteria.
But I do hear what you're saying as far as what you're saying, it's unclear. And
I think it's a little more than unclear. I think it's disingenuous.
Okay, disingenuous. And I think you're saying you think the graph is clarifying. It's clarifying.
The text is fine. I think the text is well written.
Text is explaining that particular thing, but Jefferson said maybe a better explanation that build versus no build. That's again the technical terms we have been using. We can explain that better and say that this is not just the build of the 40 million project that is causing this. There are other factors.
So would you like maybe a little bit massage of the language and then come back and look and see what it looks like?
Or just the chart, I think the language
Sorry,
is
it's the
fine.
issue.
Yeah.
Not the language, yeah.
Chart's the issue. We good? We're good? Okay, okay. Mrs. Snyder?
So, what are the overarching goals that we've set for transaction? Three, right? If I remember. So do we have an adequate discussion about what that means and whether we're achieving those, and if so, how, or potentially not achieving them? In other words, like, I want to link, again, what are the goals? Again,
It's the table explains that mobility is enhance quality of life of Northern Virginians by improving performance of the multimodal transportation system. That's one. Number two, accessibility. Strengthen the region's economy by increasing access to jobs, employees, markets, and destinations for all communities. And the third is resiliency. Improve the transportation system's ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions.
so I think, I don't know if it adequately links to what we're seeing here to those goals, but that may be something. I also think that in reviewing the public comments, the fact that there's general satisfaction perhaps by roadway users, you didn't hear a lot of comments, indicate success in that regard. But I think we need to respond as to, are we listening? And are we going to respond to those who are less satisfied with this? In other words, there's apparently a perception that we're not meeting what we ought to from an environmental standpoint, or bike ped. So I think it's incumbent upon us to sort of grapple with those negative comments and decide how we're going to address them, and how transaction and perhaps other documents will address those concerns. Even if we maintain satisfaction on those who have not commented, we should, it seems to me, be responsive to those who have commented, and what we're going to be doing in the future to better respond to their concerns.
Well, may I say, Mr. Vice Chair, with all respect, as you look at the comments themselves, the comments that are connected to environmental concerns, transit concerns, bike ped, they're almost overwhelmingly positive. They are.
Right, so I think we ought to not lose that point.
Okay.
That transaction, that these elements of transaction are responsive to the comments that we've received.
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, and I'm with no kidding, I actually do want to understand what you're saying. So, and because what I thought I heard you saying, and please correct me if I'm not correct, is that comments related to environment and transit and bike and ped were not overwhelmingly positive, and to look at them, they kind of are. But are you saying instead, like, let's lean into those because they are so positive? Is that what you're saying?
Well, there were a combination, as I understood it, expressions of concern about the environmental elements. And I think we, as well as positive support for those projects which we deem to be relevant to that. And I think we ought to make the point that, and discuss how we are meeting the negative comments, particularly on the environmental side.
Something like 80% of the comments were actually negative, right? and they were negative about roadway extensions and other things, which I take that to concern about the environment, concern about vehicle miles traveled, you know, people who are more strongly supportive of other modes, increasing transaction support for other modes. That's how I think about it. And you know, this has been a struggle from all the time I've been on MBTA, is how do we communicate that we're not just a roadway, a road building agency, and that we have a commitment to moving people in multiple ways, because people look at those dollar amounts, and roads cost way more than these other things, except for hard metal, you know, metric. So, you know, I think I have always felt like what we need to do is, I know we hate dashboards, but that we need to have a way that we look back and say, here were the positive effects of the things that we funded. Here's how many people moved on transit. Here's how many, you know, here's what happened with the hot lanes, you know, so that we start to tell a story that's about moving people as we make these investments. But I just think that gets lost, and some of it gets lost because we've been slow to start building. I mean, we're finally now, you know, we're seeing the fruits of 10 years of putting money on projects. But I do think that's part of what the problem is we keep doing these. And, you know, we went through that ranking exercise and said, these are the measures, that's how we're going to tell. But it's really how do we keep telling the story of the impacts of what we have completed, as well as look forward. I feel like there's a disconnect there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I think Councilmember Snyder is right that the comments are negative on the overall kind of portfolio of projects, but I think they're also correct, and there is a disconnect because they're expecting something that's different than what we asked for. You know, I mean, we started this process and had a conversation about what we were looking for from jurisdictions, and I think as Chair Crystal mentioned earlier, you know, we made conscious decisions not to include certain things and include certain things in kind of what we were asking for. So we shouldn't necessarily be surprised that there is a disconnect in some of these comments and what we ultimately received. I think if we want to better meet the intent of those comments in the future, we structure what we're looking for a little differently, and we'll get something different. But that's what we asked for, you know.
Yeah, I think the other challenge is we got a stack of comments here, but you know, I'm always a perspective person too, looking at the number of comments versus the number of people who live in our region and the amount of extra outreach that we did. We can all draw our own assumptions about, you know, why we didn't get more comments. But this is a snapshot, a tiny segment, an important segment of the population that took the time to weigh in. But also from a perspective standpoint, you know, I would be a lot more concerned if I was sitting here reading these comments about my jurisdiction's plan. But we also have to recognize that there's a real diversity of jurisdictions in NBTA that have very different needs. And not all of those needs are going to be accomplished by this plan. And so what might work in Prince William County is not going to be the same as what works in Arlington. And I think we have to understand that as a result of that, there's going to be some disparities in the comments. And this is one of the difficulties of trying to do something as a region with very diverse jurisdictions. There's not one answer to all of this. And so while there are definitely some negative comments in here, and I do think we need to be thinking about tied to environmental stewardship as we move forward, I don't think we need to look at this transaction plan as something that's a failure, because the other piece of it that you know, I think people don't understand is the unconstrained nature of it. So they're looking at the amount of projects in here and thinking, like a lot of our constituents, oh, all of these are going to be done by next Thursday. And this is unconstrained. It's a laundry list. Not everything in here may even be done. And so I think that adds to the complexity and difficulty, but the diversity of our region, I think, is something that is going to continue to be our challenge. And we have to do the best to come up with a set of projects and plans in here that meet various different locality needs as our funding partners. And, these are good conversations, absolutely, for us to have as a region, but I don't think we're going to solve every regional problem the same way in every jurisdiction like we might want to. And I think that's just a perspective thing. I think we have to keep in mind when we see the comments.
Yes, Ms. Bishop.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't say this to marginalize the negative comments, but it, after all, is not a scientific poll. It's purely voluntary. And in general, happy people don't comment negatively. Happy people tend to not comment at all.
Something I've noticed just in Prince William County, interestingly enough, is that a lot of ours aren't adding additional roads. It's interchange. We're fixing a lot of interchanges because of congestion of those interchanges, Fallsport interchange. I mean, so much of it is interchange work, which can be conflated with roadways, but it's not a bad thing to keep traffic flowing as I drive around the county. I just want to make that distinction because a lot of our projects, with that laundry list are about interchanges. So.
I would be brief. Thank you all for these comments. It's very helpful. We hear them all the time as staff. Oh, it's too much money on roads. Oh, I don't have enough money for here. And I think what Chairman McKay says really resonates. To your point, Ms. Hines, now that we have Haroon as the modeler, we can do some of that. But when we tell our story, that's like, yeah, that's very good, but you still fund roads. And that's something we grapple with. And then there are various laws that govern and tell us what we need to do. And, depending on where you are, it works or it doesn't work. We're always saying we are multimodal. No one has more money on bus rapid transit than the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, not in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I should say. No one. But that's not what's picked up. It's because we do fund roads and, with what's going on with climate change, I think that what I hear at least, you have all of these new lane miles. Well, number one, we can't legally build everything in transaction if we wanted to. Not only do we not have the money, but legally, because we have projects that are in Maryland in the district, because this is about moving people, as you noted, helping people with their commute. And even with the land use, we hear, MBTA, I was told you failed to look at land use. Well, legally, we do not look at land use, but what we do is take COGS cooperative forecasts. So there are things we can definitely improve in-house, but I do want to piggyback on what Chairman McKay said. It's because this region is so diverse. This is why we always talk about the multimodal nature of the region. But we will go back, do our homework as well to make sure that we address some concerns, because we don't want to say, we can't do it, it doesn't matter, because it does matter. But perspective is very important as well.
And I think to piggyback on that, if we think back to the survey that was done, I don't know how many months ago, where it asked, would you like to see more transit? Would you like to see more roads? It was very telling. I mean, you just look at it, no people lived. Alexandria and Arlington had like 80% of the people saying like, yes, we're transit. Prince William and Prince William. That's also true. You guys can't satisfy them. You cannot satisfy the trees, no matter what. Prince William and Loudoun had just the opposite of both Alexandria, and Fairfax was somewhere back in the middle, which goes to, is where people are located, because Prince William and Loudoun have Gainesville and Leavittsville and all those places, and we're never going to put a metro out there. We're just not. And so I think where we are is also very important. I had a very, very good meeting, interesting meeting with members of PEC today, and I made that comment and, a lot of the things that we talked about, we met for an hour was, to some degree, some of these things can be, some of these concerns can be accomplished not by the 70% of NVTA money, but by the 30% that goes to localities. And what kind of connections are we making in intra jurisdictions? Because what we see in the new traffic post-COVID analysis is that the number of trips have not changed, but the types of trips have changed. It's not people going, from Loudoun into DC anymore, because when people are working virtually from home, but that person who's at home would take a lunch break and run to the grocery store now, and that didn't happen before. And so what happens you're inside your counties as far as miles traveled and how it impacts the environment is just as important as what we're doing in long range travel. So there's a lot of things I think to consider. And I also think to make sure we all, I don't think there's anyone at this table who doesn't care about greenhouse gas emissions, vehicle roads traveled, all those things. Every one of us cares about those things.
Let me just make one more comment. It seems to me the fundamental question for the region is, however we do it, and diversity of jurisdictions, are we achieving what we ought to in terms of the environment as a region? And it seems to me transaction ought to move us in that direction. And are we moving sufficiently in that direction? Recognizing that there are different things that need to be done, there are different needs, and that's not the only objective. That's the fundamental question.
According to the Council of Governments report that came out yesterday, we're doing pretty fantastic, to be quite honest, in the region.
We are. Yeah. So how do we maintain that?
And even improve it. Well, thank you. And I know you guys got an earful, and this is supposed to be a quick meeting.
Sorry.
Maybe not, don't blame me. All right, we're going to go on to item number 9, the Joint Commission on Transportation Accountability Annual Report. Ms. Buck.
So, Madam Chair, I will be brief. We are required to file an annual report with the Joint Commission on Transportation Accountability by November the 15th each year. So we have that document in your meeting packet this evening. I do want to draw your attention to table 6, where we show the fiscal year 2023, the 2027 revenue estimate. We made a change to the total amount. We had some rounding errors, if you will. So we did have, compared to what was sent out last week, we did update that number. Additionally, what's also in this report, and that was page 17, the table on page 17. Additionally, what you will find in this report is how the localities are utilizing the 30% revenues. The 30%, of course, once you meet the certification requirements, you get your give or transmit to 30%. The localities have informed us that how they're using the 30%. There are no sunset provisions on the 30% either. So you can save, or you can utilize it to match 70% funded projects, smart scale, or any public transportation purpose. But we did want to provide that information as well. And the last point on this, we do not file late. So November 15th is the deadline. Assuming there are no issues with it, we will make sure it is filed on time.
Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Buckman. Item 10, and I will be very brief, it is the Governance Personnel Committee report. Of course, in January, we will start a short session of the General Assembly. As we talked last year in MBTA, we wanted to scale down our legislative program to 4 or 5 really important points we want to cover, so that we can hit them all when we went down there. They are in your package and they are in order. They are first, protect dedicated revenue sources and powers of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which in my head also means we want to be really careful about ever opening up legislation. Number 2, we store long-term funding to the authority. And I will add something onto that. I will never ever support taxing us again for the third time to get money, the money that was taken out of the out of the MBTA back. We will not be taxed with it. Listen, you better be agreeing with me.
I'm gonna say something on that point that underscores what you're saying that
Okay, let's
concerns me. It concerns me about the language. I know this is not the legislative report, but that bullet point says the region still needs to restore 38.5 million, as if we did something wrong and the region needs to do something about it.
Oh,
No.
okay, and that's a
No.
point. That's a
That's
point.
not, it-
That's a
it-
point.
and so I just
Yeah.
want to make sure,
The
you know, if
minister
this
needs to
goes
have
anywhere
restored.
else, is
Yeah.
that the state still needs
I
to
got it.
restore.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah, the state still needs to restore the regional
Yeah,
funding,
yeah,
to your
that's
point,
good.
if there's any confusion.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, annually, annually.
Yeah.
Right.
You see, we got all that. Okay, good catch. Good catch. MBTA being responsible for your tax dollars over here. Number 3 is protect Virginia's transportation funding. And then number 4, which is our kind of newest initiative and speaks to all the things we talked about tonight to a little bit, right? Is support the use of effective transportation technology. So those are the 4 main points that we will be taking before the General Assembly this year. You know, who knows what's going to happen to them? Will they pass? Will they not? Will they get any traction? I don't know. But we should keep them. And know that we should keep them. So, any questions? You want to add anything, Ms. Green? No, nothing at this time. All right. All right, let's go to the Finance Committee reports. Mayor Richel, I'll let you take us through A, B, and C.
Just very quickly,
Oh, I'm
Madam Chair,
sorry.
before we get there, do you
Yes.
want any sort of formal action endorsing these, or is it just assumed there are no objections? Just a question.
So I think what's gonna happen is, we're gonna come back to the November meeting. Ms. Boehner's gonna work on language, because we have some budget discussion today, and then come back at the November meeting, and then we will endorse them in November in advance of the legislative session. It will happen in January. Yes, you do, yeah. Mayor Richel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The last meeting of the NVTA Finance Committee was September 8th, and the committee voted to recommend approval of 2 action items. First, the committee approved 4 recommendations to the full authority and FY23 proposed operating budget adjustment to permit the early hire of an already approved planning position. This item was approved by the full authority later that same evening. Second, the committee also recommended changes to policy 29 in support of implementing the duplicate reimbursement audit program. This involved directing staff to develop a cost allocation process. And this item was on tonight's agenda and was addressed by the full authority earlier this evening. I'm happy to report that in September, as well as earlier this evening, the committee received updates on the FY22 financial audit, and the committee will be recommending its acceptance at the November meeting. The committee also received a report showing project reimbursements in FY22 were significantly below prior fiscal years, despite an increased number of approved projects. Staff was encouraged to reach out to project sponsors to stimulate project advancement and therefore to use NVTA project funds. The committee was also advised that NVTA staff had received a project reimbursement request, which included 72 invoices. Some of those invoices dating back as far as 5 calendar years. In order to reduce externally imposed risks, the committee directed and provided guidance to NVTA staff to work towards policy solutions to ensure submitted receipts for reimbursement are no older than 18 months from the date of reimbursement submission. The committee expects to review the draft policy and make a recommendation to the full authority in the coming months. Mr. Longy can address any questions related to these reports.
Thank you very much. Mr. Longy?
The written staff reports on the portfolio, revenue, and operating budget are in the packet. I'll just encapsulate them by saying all the numbers are going in the right direction.
That's good. And moving on. And in the programming, the dapper Mr. Wilson.
I'm Chair. Too soon, Madam Chair. We met on October 3rd. We reviewed the same material that you guys just reviewed a little while ago. We had a very similar conversation that you all had, albeit with more gusto and enthusiasm. And we meet again right before Thanksgiving. So, if there's any questions.
All right, thank you. The planning coordinating, we don't have a report on that tonight, I do not believe. And the technical advisory committee, we do not have a report on.
There in your back.
There, yeah, well, yes, but not a verbal report. Ms. Blackman, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
The only thing I'd like to add, Madam Chair, and we acknowledged this earlier in the year, but the authority turned 20 this year, and next year is the 10th anniversary of the funding bill, HB 2313. Because of the workload this year, we didn't do anything, but I have received a few questions or comments. So what we are looking to do is have an official, I guess, celebration or acknowledgement on June the 8th, which would be the second Thursday of the month, which would be, assuming you keep your meetings on the second Thursday of the month, your regularly scheduled authority meeting. So if you could just save the date, but you will hear more from us in the coming months about that. And that's all I have.
Anyone watching, when we come here on June the 8th, all of us elected officials will be working hard and not just partying. So, on that date, correct?
Right.
You can say that.
This is a work-related event.
There you go, there you go. Okay, I always feel like I should have something to say in chairs comments, because Marty, you know, we always did. But I don't.
Party, but we don't get.
But I don't. So, anything else for the good of the body? Seeing nothing, we are adjourned.
Absolutely.
Oh,